Today on my fertility podcast, we are joined by Nazan. She is going to share her journey about secondary infertility, the challenges of fertility treatments, and some of the taboos surrounding fertility and mental health in South Asian communities. If you'd like to connect with Nazan, you can check her out on Instagram where she is documenting her motherhood journey at motherhood underscore one as in the number more time.
Hello, Nazan, and welcome. A few weeks ago, you connected to us via email. You sent a beautiful email that I was so impressed, and I replied to you right away. Tell us what was in that email and what inspired you to write it.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, thank you so much for your very prompt response. I was so shocked. I was not expecting that at all. It got me excited. It got me thinking that maybe this topic was something that is worth sharing out there. So it all began with that post you guys posted on your My Fertility podcast page where you spoke about the movie Joy. And I had only recently watched the movie, and what a brilliant movie it is, I must say. But when I was watching the movie, there were so many scenes in that movie that just got me thinking. I would take a pause and I would be like, oh my God, this movie is set in a time which is 60, 65 years ago. And there are still so many bits and pieces that I can resonate with that feel like, oh my God, but this still happens. Oh my God, but women are still seen like this. And particularly, I remember there was a scene where Jean Purdy is having a conversation with her mom, and she says, Mom, I don't think I'll be able to have kids. And her mom just brushes it off casually and says, Oh, don't be silly. Of course you will. And then she has to step ahead and explain to her mom that there is a medical condition because of which I will not be able to have kids. And the look on the mother's face, the way she sinks into her sofa, was something that just clicked so many ideas, so many thoughts in my head. Where in most South Asian societies, and I'm sure there are a lot of other women from different backgrounds who are probably going to be able to relate to this. But because I belong to the South Asian society, I can speak for that. We are very progressive, but there's still a huge population out there who still looks at women in that gender role. If you're a woman, you must or you will reproduce. And it feels like an invisible burden almost on you, where you're meeting these expectations. We're not having children either due to medical reasons or even by choice. Is something that is a taboo in your community, which you cannot openly speak about. I personally know so many women out there coming from educated backgrounds who still hesitate to openly share or talk about issues as common as PCOS for the sole reason that it probably will have an impact on their fertility. I just thought that, this is something that needs to be out there. It's high time. We're in 2025. Like, women have to break through. Like, this cannot be something that you're living with. But took me a few years, like I said, to finally find the courage to speak about my fertility journey. And the reason that I was inspired to write to you guys is your platform, your reach, the audience that you're catering to. I would love and I strongly believe that with today's episode, we are going to be resonating with a lot of women, not only from my cultural background, but many others for this particular taboo.
Thank you so much for reaching out and writing that email and being brave, right, to come forward because being at the forefront and breaking down those barriers is really, really scary. And thank you so much for doing that and for joining us today. I think that you are absolutely correct. I think I was saying before we started recording, I love this platform of the podcast because it's such a great way to talk about fertility, but not just about, the medicines and the protocols, but to talk about the feelings, the experiences, and to be able to share and really get into like the deep heart of it, the meat and potatoes, as opposed to, that short appointment with your physician where you're just kind of really trying to get through as much as possible. And this is a great way to do it. I'm so proud of you. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your own journey to motherhood?
So it began in 2015. That is when I had my firstborn. I was able to conceive with no medical interventions of any sort, no pills, no appointments, nothing. We were very lucky to be able to conceive naturally. And then when my son was about a year and a half old, we decided to start trying for baby number two. 2 years after trying, when I wasn't getting pregnant, we started, you know, looking into getting help, seeing doctors. And that is when I first heard of the term secondary infertility. And they said the cause was unknown. And for someone like me who comes from a background of being a lawyer, I like to see things in black and white. It's hard for my mind to understand something like a doctor's telling me we don't know why this happens. And it took me a minute to process that secondary infertility was even a possibility, like, again, because of the whole because of the whole cultural background that you are raised in. If you've made a baby once, you can make a baby again, like, what is the secondary infertility? So fast forward to 2021. By that time, we had switched between three fertility clinics. I had switched four doctors. We had gone through multiple tests. I felt like there was a diagnosis every time we saw some doctor, and it was always layered with uncertainty. We had seen naturopaths, acupuncturists, tried cupping therapy, exercising, healthy eating, clean lifestyle, you name it. But year after year, I found myself questioning, what more can I do? Who else can I see? And the frustration really piles up, like the emotions, anger, hurt, loneliness, stress, and most importantly, the loss of trust in your own body, the incapability to understand why, like, why is it not working, is horrible. And I remember around 2022, we were going through an IUI cycle. And I woke up one morning and I was blind in one eye. I didn't know what was going on. And I was diagnosed with acute uveitis in my eye. And I remember so vividly telling my husband that, you know what, let's not tell our fertility doctor that this is happening because he's going to stop all my treatment then. And my husband, being my biggest strength and thankfully the logical one at that time, he convinced me that we have to disclose all medical conditions. And rightfully so, all my fertility treatment was put on hold till I recovered fully. But I want to share this because this is what this journey does to you. Regardless of how logical, how educated, how experienced you are, that desperation can sometimes really get to you. And now when I look back, I feel like, oh my God, like if someone was to come to me and tell me that I'm blind in one eye, I'm on steroids, but I'm not going to disclose this, I would like, nope, you cannot do that. But the feelings of despair and hopelessness are real. You have to own them, you have to acknowledge them. You have to do it first before you expect others to validate them for you. So, needless to say, during my 7 years journey with secondary infertility, there were many such highs and lows. And I've also experienced a few heartbreak for some losses along the way, which also resulted in multiple surgeries for me. But what seemed to be a tunnel with no light at the end for so many years finally gave us our beautiful miracle baby, who's now 5 months old, thanks to Markham Fertility also. And currently, I like to call this phase of my life experiencing motherhood one more time.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And one of the things that really struck me when I read your email, I remember it was at nighttime and I was in my office, and I don't usually check emails. I should say that I check emails all the time, but I don't usually reply after hours. I check them all the time, but I don't always reply after hours. But yours just really just hit me right in the feels. And one of the things that I loved about your email is when you talked about, and your words were something like on the lines of like, in my culture, and you were referring to South Asian culture, but you're right, it applies to many cultures. Everybody just expects a woman to reproduce. And you spoke about that a lot in your email and how that was so hard for you. Can you talk a little bit more about how that expectation affected you personally and affected your relationships?
Of course, I come from a well-educated background, a well-educated family, and I was married into one too. But having said that, there is a role that your community plays once you're part of it, like regardless of what your own bubble looks like, there is always this external pressure. There's always this external influence, for a lack of a better word. There are certain very unreasonable, unacceptable behaviors, comments, remarks that are allowed to slip through because that's just how our culture is. It's always given that justification, but that's how it's been for so many years. But that's how our ancestors have been doing it or thinking about it, or that's just how it is. And I remember only 3 months into my marriage, I was already answering questions like, why aren't you pregnant yet? Or even stuff like, is there something wrong with you?
Yes, it's
Direct,
always, yeah.
direct
The
questions
classic.
like that.
Yeah.
And today, when I am in my late 30s, when I am well rooted in who I am and who I'm not, I'm able to laugh at those comments. But when I look back, I still see myself feeling very cornered. I see myself feeling very vulnerable. I remember that I was constantly stressing out about, when will we get pregnant? When is it going to happen? It was almost like an agenda item. And that steals away so much joy, so much life from that part of your being. You're newlyweds, you're young, you're still ambitious to reach that peak in your career and do so much with your life, but yet you're waking up every morning hoping to see two pink lines just because you're answering all these questions about what's wrong, why it's not happening. I remember very well that this was something that I experienced as well personally, that motherhood was seen as a natural extension of me being a woman. And as soon as I had my son in 2015, which was within a year after my marriage, suddenly I felt like there was a box that got ticked off. My job as a married woman was done. I had produced an offspring. And for a while, you are spared from the spotlight. Then they go around looking for another newlywed and she has to, or he has to go through the whole vicious cycle. But a few years down the road, when I was diagnosed with secondary infertility, I found myself being scared and hesitant all over again. I belong to a society where not all the women, but still a vast majority are living with the belief that women are deeply ingrained by cultural, religious, emotional factors when it comes to being fertile. So imagine my fear of having to disclose, forget even talk about, but even disclose something as unlogical as a diagnosis of secondary infertility. Nobody would understand that. They would just think I'm coming up with an excuse for not wanting another baby. I've heard people come tell me, oh, do you just want to enjoy your life? And that's why you don't want to have a baby. Like they rip you off that independence. They rip you off of that choice where some women, yes, they don't want to have a baby. Maybe they don't see themselves in that role. Maybe they're doing the right thing by not going down that path because they know that they might not be able to fulfill the responsibilities that come along with being a mother. But that's just not allowed. So I feel like, yes, those expectations, they really affected me personally at that time. And even when I was diagnosed, and it took a while. It took a while to be able to own my journey, to be able to find the strength that there's nothing wrong with me. This is not something that's in my control. I do not need to answer these questions. There's no need. You are allowed to respectfully say, I'm sorry, but I don't think that I owe you an explanation. I'm sorry, but this is very personal and I do not wish to answer. But these responses are not acceptable. They are seen as being disrespectful or, like you're hurting their feelings. But you have to eventually get there so that you can train people around you to realize the importance of boundaries, realize the importance of respecting people's individualities. So yeah, I remember very well being confused, being very lonely and disappointed because of firstly not being able to reproduce for a second time, and secondly not being able to talk about it.
Your story really resonates with me. I went through infertility as well. I was married and then I was a fertility fellow. And then I became a fertility specialist very quickly after that. And so I was starting my career as a fertility specialist and going through infertility as well. And did multiple IVF, had my first child, and then I had secondary infertility like you. And I remember at the time, and now I say it, and I think, what a stupid thought that was. But I remember at the time that I was so embarrassed to tell people I had infertility because I was a fertility specialist. Somehow, magically, I shouldn't have infertility because if you're a fertility specialist and you know everything about reproduction, you shouldn't be affected by this condition. And now that I say it, and I think it's the stupidest thought ever, but at the time, I felt like if I said it out loud, people were going to think less of me. People were going to think I'm not knowledgeable, that I'm not professional. How is Dr. Garcia supposed to help me have a child? She cannot even have a child herself. So I see what you're saying about what this disease can do to you and make you think in a way that is so out of touch with reality. Because even though I'm not from a South Asian community, I'm from a Spanish community, which in a way is very similar, very grounded in family values and whatnot. It's the same thing. My mom had kids young, my grandmothers, my aunts, my cousins, everybody was reproducing easily in my family. And I was expected to do the same. And I wanted to do the same. And I remember going through it thinking, wait, do I really want to be a mother? Or is the society talking that's making me feel this way? And it's so hard to know what is what. But I eventually decided that I definitely wanted to be a mom. And I did everything I could. And I'm very lucky to have my two beautiful children. But the idea that a woman can be worth it of love and respect and be valuable and feel good about herself without being a mother at 33 years of age, which is when I started the journey, that was not anywhere in my consciousness. It was not possible that those two things could be together. Now it is because I'm older, because I've lived this life and I've gone through fertility and see so many patients. And I tell my patients all the time, you're worthy of love no matter what, no matter how this journey ends. You can be happy and fulfilled. That is not something that I believed at the beginning of my journey or that anyone ever mentioned to me at the beginning of my journey.
Absolutely. Also, I think that although you are speaking about the South Asian community, this is universal,
Yeah.
right? This is an absolutely universal experience that I think that everybody feels. And I mean, when you talk about that, it almost feels like the pipeline, right? Like you are a female, therefore you will get married, and therefore you will start having your child, and then you will have another child. And you're right, it does feel like a checkbox, like a to-do list that we're all handed at some point. As soon as somebody starts talking about engagement rings, it feels like
Yeah. There's a baby box. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I was with he now husband, he was then boyfriend. And, as soon as I think we were together 2 years, people are like, well, you got to get married because you have to start having kids. I'm like, whoa, we're jumping really far ahead. What's interesting is that, it's a universal experience. But I will say people do say these offhanded comments and these offhanded questions, and they don't necessarily realize the consequences of it or what the meaning of it could be or how they can reflect on it. Because I can tell you, for myself, I've gotten questions about my own fertility from fertility patients.
Keeps getting better.
I can think of a time where I was in the midst of a procedure on this patient. And I guess you're right. It was just like a societally accepted, societally normal topic of conversation. And she starts asking me about my childbearing plans. And I was an absolute deer in the headlights. I wish I had come up with an eloquent response like you had, and I'm going to write that one down. I did not. I will admit I got deer in the headlights look and was like, I need quiet for the procedure. And then I just kept going. But it's true. I don't think that person meant any harm, that they did not mean anything bad. They didn't need to make me feel bad in any way. And I know that like to my core. but it's just such a normal thing. It comes out of people's mouths. It slips off people's tongues.
Yes. And one thing that I always say, well, not always, I've recently, in my journey of learning to advocate for myself, one thing that I always, always say is that your intent does not negate the impact of your words. We hear this so often, especially from the culture that I come from, and especially if it's coming from elderly people. Regardless of how invasive or how insensitive or dismissive a comment or remark is, it is almost always justified by, but we meant good, you know? It was coming from a place of love. Sure, that's amazing.
Two things can be true at the same time. Yeah.
Yes, but you have to start to learn to understand that your intention does not take away the impact of what's coming out of your mouth. And sometimes the impact can be very detrimental. I remember that I was going through my first miscarriage and we were in a wedding, a family wedding. And obviously, because of all the medications and the pregnancy, even though it was early on and the miscarriage, I was a bit puffed up. And again, a very common comment in our society is, oh my God, you're chubby, So why are you so chubby? So this random auntie stopped me and she was like, are you pregnant? And I haven't seen her. Like, no, let me put it this way. I've seen her only twice in my entire life. Like you said, Dr. Weiss, the fact that she felt that she could get away with a question like that to someone like me, who she also has seen only twice in her life, is just amazing. And again, like, I'm not saying that she meant to poke me in any raw way, but I was going through a miscarriage.
Mhm.
And that was not a known fact. I was not carrying a board that said that. So there was no space. Like you said, you were a deer in the headlights. I just did not know what to do. I was like, no, I'm just fat.
And this is why we need to have these conversations because, in fairness, our parents' generation never had these conversations.
No.
Like my mom, all that she knew is that people get married, that have kids, and then have other kids, and that's all that she knew. I think now that we are talking about it more, there is no excuse for the younger generations to continue
Yes.
to do this. To the generations to come, the alpha generation, our current 7 and 8 year old in the world today. So I think that I'm hoping that by continuing to have these conversations over and over again, we are opening up a future for our daughters and sons to not be brought in this burden, like you call it, in this expectation that that is your worth as a woman, that that is your value as a woman in this society to get married and procreate. So
Yes.
I think that you are doing a service by talking about this because this is how that ends. So tell me, Nazan, you mentioned having difficulties sharing your journey with your family for all the reasons that we talked about. What advice would you give to women in that situation, having to balance the need for privacy and the need for support?
Often another problem of this part of the world where we talk about fertility and infertility and the challenges of bringing a new life to the world, it's mostly centered towards women. There is a whole big chunk, 50% of this entire universe is related to men who are just absent from discussions. I first want to start addressing both men and women. If you are facing infertility because of a male factor or a female factor, I want to first hold some space and let you guys know that you're so brave. You're so brave to even be out there, to even be on this journey. And I want them to remember and to know that there's nothing that is wrong with you. Nobody goes out there and shops for these things, like you didn't choose to be here. It's so important. And this is one thing that I really want to tell people, that please try and remember that a medical diagnosis does not define your being. It does not define your individuality. It does not define your capabilities. A medical diagnosis is just a medical diagnosis, and that is it. My advice in how you should try to strike a balance between holding your privacy and seeking support is to first start by understanding what works for you, what you need. Sit with yourself, ask yourself, what is it that I'm looking for? What do I need? Do I need 10 people to know that I'm in the thick of this? Or do I need my space? Do I need my protection? Do I need my bubble? Do I need to stay away from the crowd? So, first, I think the starting point should always be to sit with yourself or your spouse or your better half or your partner, whoever you're going through this with, and figure out what works best for you guys. And once you have that sorted, advocate. Advocate for yourself. Never, ever shy away from asking what you need. We attach so much importance to how that's going to make the other person feel. But if I don't tell my dad, he's going to be upset. But if I don't share this with my mother in law, she's not going to like me and I'm not going to be the favorite daughter in law anymore. It's great. It's great to be caring and looking out for everyone's feelings, but it has to start with you. You have to first love yourself, to care for yourself before you start thinking about how your life impacts others. So, know your people, know what you need, be able to clearly lay down what meaningful support means for you. It is not a cookie cutter approach. It's not the same for everybody. Some people love having big circles, big support systems, and that's amazing. But for others, I fall into that category somewhere. When I'm going through something, I like my own space. I don't prefer being hovered over by people asking questions about, oh, what's going on now? Are you okay? Do you need anything? Like in that moment, I prefer processing whatever it is that I'm going through on my own. So it can look different. So know what you need. And once you know, once you have it defined, then do not shy away. Do not shy away from being vocal about how it works for you, what meaningful support means to you, and then hold your ground. Ask what you need and then hold your ground.
Those are really powerful words and amazing advice. I wish I could just like write it down, copy and paste, and just give it to every fertility patient.
I have my notes. I'll email them to you.
And they put it, I want them to put it on the fridge. Hold your ground. Set boundaries. It's okay. You're still a good person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah, and the
Yes.
way you advocated for yourself, because you mentioned going to multiple clinics and multiple doctors. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And it's funny, my story about how I landed at Markham was through a loss. And I just got lucky because I ended up at the ER and Dr. Weiss was luckily the OB on call that day. So what were the odds, I was meant to eventually get here today.
Yeah, she started talking about fertility. And I was like, I know something about fertility, you say. This is a topic I know something about.
Or two, yes.
It was truly serendipity, I think, that we met. But so with this, you've really highlighted the importance of taking care of your mental health, and you've given some phenomenal strategies and ways to do that. But how did you get to this point? So when you look back and you were, I'm going to say, in the thick of it, going through it, feeling all the emotions, going through everything, how did you, should I say, maybe start to heal, or how did you start to grow, or how did you start to progress to sort of get to the point where you are now? How did you start to blossom? How about that? To be at the point where you are now?
That's so sweet of you to word it that way. Being the catalyst of change, even if it is just for your own self, is not easy. It is not easy to break that generational stigma that it's all you've known, right? It's all you've known, it's all you've heard. And then to realize that, wait a minute, this is not okay. There has to be another way to deal with this. There has to be a better way, a better approach, a healthier way of navigating this journey. That realization is your baby step. And that happened to me when I was going through my first loss. It was a silent miscarriage. And for someone like me who's an avid reader, or so I like to think, I was shocked at the fact that I had never heard of this term before. when I was told that this is what I was going through, it was a silent miscarriage. Like secondary infertility, I just couldn't wrap my head around it because my body was playing pregnant. And I was like, but how? But how is this possible? And, that is when, for the first time, I learned and I realized that it was so important to prioritize myself. There were people who were rushing to help, who were willing to be there, who were offering their advice. Again, everything definitely coming from a place of care. But sometimes it's not what you need. And unfortunately, like a minute ago when Dr. Garcia said that in today's world, lack of awareness is literally not a valid excuse anymore. There's so much out there that is at the disposal of a click, that you laying down on saying, I was just not aware, is kind of you telling me that you're unwilling to be aware, that
Mm.
you are unwilling to evolve, that you are unwilling to unlearn generational norms. We are no longer in a world where we can rely on monkey see, monkey do. It cannot go that way. Just because my ancestors said it, it's okay to say it. No, sir. We thought that being on call with you 24 hours a day was going to help you heal. Maybe not. Maybe ask. Maybe ask, what kind of support are you looking for? How can I help? So, yes, overcoming those challenges, unfortunately, I learned it the hard way. I started learning it the hard way, let's put it that way. And I want to still say that I'm still learning. And again, once you start bringing about that change, once you start drawing that boundary, once you start advocating for yourself, that's when you turn into the bad guy. There's
Yeah.
pushback, and you have to be ready. I remember having a conversation with a very close friend about this, and she said something that really stuck with me. And she said, you have to learn to experience that guilt because it's going to come, because they will make sure that it comes, that you will face that pushback. You will face that, oh my God, she's isolating herself. Oh my God, she doesn't want us to
She's
be there.
going crazy.
She's going
She
crazy.
should be lucky she at least has one child. What is her problem?
Oh my God, Dr. Garcia.
Sounds familiar?
The number of times. And another thing that I really want to take this opportunity to highlight again for people who may be able to resonate with this is the religious beliefs and how they are linked to your experiences. Please, please, for God's sake, do not, do not be God's assistant. Do not tell a woman who's going through a loss that maybe you should seek more forgiveness. I've heard that. I
Oh,
got that. Because yes, again, your intent does not negate your impact. When you say stuff like that to someone who's going through a loss, you're indirectly telling them
It's
that,
your
oh,
fault.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah,
mhm.
maybe God took away that number one, that is not how God in any religion operates.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is not how it works. And even if it does work that way, please let him handle it.
Yeah, it's between you and the big person. Yeah.
You can't go around seeing garbage like this. Like, please educate yourself. And for those who are in the process of learning these things and advocating for themselves, or even going through infertility or losses, please love yourself enough to talk for yourself. Own your imperfections. Own it. Own it, like shamelessly own it. Yes, I can't have a baby. Yes, I'm struggling. Yes, I'm trying. Yes, I made a baby once. I cannot do it again. You know, once you start voicing it out like this, people will learn to hold back unsolicited advice and comments that are hurtful, that are dismissive. 90% of the time, they don't even realize that what rolled off of their tongue did not sit right with the other person. So, yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still the bad guy in a lot of places, but I'm okay with it. I've reached a point, thankfully, in my heart, in my head, where I can channel through that guilt of being labeled as that person who is rejecting support, who is not wanting us to be around, who is, she keeps things to herself. Maybe that works for you and it's okay. Learn to hold space and respect for people like that.
Yeah, I think you ultimately have to teach people how to treat you. And also, I think two things can be true. I went through all of those comments. I still remember when I was pregnant with my second. So I had a boy, and my second one was a boy. And I knew it would be my last one because I had so many troubles conceiving the second one. I was 40 years old. There was no way was going to have a third. I was telling my friend this, and I was pregnant with my second, and I said, I'm having another boy. And she goes, oh no, that means you'll never have a girl now. And that just crushed me. Like, here I am sharing with her, I'm finally pregnant with this baby, and this is what she comes back. And, that person, I'm still good friends with her. It took me a while. I did call her out on it, and she was mortified and she apologized. And it's like you said, I don't know that her intention was like, you love pink. Look at me. Like, you love pink. You love sparkly things. And I really picture you with the girl and the pink and the sparkle. And now that's not happening. That's why, like, in my whole life since I've known you, I always really picture a girl for you. So I had compassion for her and I understood where that come from. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't going to call her out on that BS. Like, you still get to advocate for yourself. You don't need to suppress. That's what I learned from that. Like, I could have just suppressed and be like, well, she didn't mean it, and that's that, and just keep it closed in and just suffer in silence. And instead, I chose to call her out on it and told her, and she apologized, and we're still friends, and it's perfectly okay. I flew over to Carberry just to see her because I love her so much, and I know her intention was good. But that doesn't take away from the fact that that wasn't the best thing to say in that situation, and that I had every right to advocate for myself, like you say, and say it. And in a way, that's how you teach people to be treated. And I'm glad that I did that, because I really felt a sense of, after all these many years, like, no, I'm not gonna not say something. I'm not gonna keep quiet one more time. This is it. I'm done being quiet. What you're saying kind of resonates for me, that you can be compassionate for people and understand that they really intend well, but that doesn't mean that you cannot be compassionate with yourself as well and know that it hurt deeply and that you deserve better.
100%. 100%. And that's what this journey does to you too, Dr. Garcia, doesn't it? And I'm sure you've been so open about your own journey, and so many women look up to you and find hope and inspiration to go on. But I felt like this is what infertility did to me, because you start questioning your own worth, because there is this sense of your body failing you that is attached with infertility somehow, even if the entire reason for you not being able to conceive is a male factor, somehow, somewhere, it's the woman who takes this invisible load on herself that, oh, what more can I do? Should I eat healthier? Should I go to the gym more? Is there something that I'm missing? Or maybe I didn't drink enough water, you know? So many. I remember when I had my first loss, I remember, and now when I think about it, I'm like, oh my God, like I put myself through that. But I remember thinking that it's probably because I did not drink enough water, because I was so nauseous all the time. And I thought, as humans, you always need to kind of pin a reason down to what's going on in your life, right? And it's hard to accept sometimes that there are so many things out there that are beyond the control and ambit of science itself, of no matter how many specialists are put together. It does sometimes come down to sheer luck. And to not be able to find a reason to pin down a certain event can be daunting. It can affect you, and you start questioning your own capabilities.
In this conversation, we've hit on so many things, even outside of fertility, right? I mean, we've talked about societal norms, how cultures are different yet kind of all the same in terms of the cultural experiences that we all have. Because I see us all, one person said, we're all like, huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
we're all nodding our heads
South
away.
Asian, Spanish, European, we're all experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, no, the three of us are a decent representation of the United Nations, to be honest.
We cover the entire world. We're missing Asian, but that's Crystal.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But, that is layered on top of also stigma around mental health, right? Because fertility and mental health are so deeply, intricately intertwined, especially infertility and mental health. But then mental health comes with its own stigmas, often in many cultures, generationally, generally in society. as well. And so it's almost like a double whammy in a way for a patient who's going through infertility and also struggling mentally with their mental health, right? Where it's additive almost in terms of all the reasons why other people around you are struggling to figure out, what to say to you, what to do with you, basically, and sort of how to be around you in some way, right? And so I think this is a very important conversation. And I'm so glad that you came forward to share your story. I know we said that before, but I wanted to thank you again. So let's say somebody is listening to this podcast episode right now. They're driving in their car. They're maybe have experienced a loss. Maybe they're experiencing fertility issues. They are feeling maybe alone. They're feeling maybe isolated, like they can't talk about it. They're getting the "when are you guys having kids?" question that we all know and love. What would you say to that person?
I want to try and articulate this in the best way possible. As women, again, like you said, in most societies, I guess, we're raised to put ourselves on the back burner often. If you've heard of that phrase where they say the burnt toast syndrome, the woman of the house, the mom, the wife is going to eat that burnt toast and she's going to serve the nice ones to everyone else. You have to stop that. As a woman, regardless of what journey you're on, regardless of what part of life you're on, regardless of what cultural, societal, religious backgrounds you belong to, you have to begin with prioritizing yourself, loving yourself in its true essence, valuing your worth, knowing what you are, what your choices are, what you're capable of. Telling repeatedly, like there's so many things out there these days, mental health affirmations, and there's morning affirmations and evening affirmations where we have these fancy little cards glued around our bedrooms and our dressing tables that say you're worthy, you're important. But seriously, sit with that thought for a minute. Sit with it for a minute and ask yourself, do you really look at yourself like that? I remember my best friend once when I was going through a rough period. She called me and she was like, Nazan, I have an assignment for you. And I was like, okay. And she was like, I need you to write down 3 things that make you happy. And I was like, oh, that's easy. And then I started writing and she was like, no, but wait, here's the challenge. And I was like, what? And she's like, it has to be you. You cannot write, my son makes me happy. You cannot write, us spending time as a family makes me happy. No, just you. Just you. And that's hard. It didn't come easy to me because my life revolves around all those who I love and care for. And that's where I feel like that's my job. That's where I feel fulfilled. But once you break through that cycle and once you start to do things that make you happy, that matter to you, literally you break free. It's almost like you take that deep breath after a long time and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know. I didn't know. Like there's so many times when I found myself questioning that, am I doing this right? I stepped away from work to be able to optimize my chances of conceiving again. And it was hard. It was a very dark time for me because I've always been an overachiever, a go getter. And suddenly I was taking the decision of taking a break from my career. And I was self doubting, constantly questioning myself. And somehow all of that translated into me telling myself that now that I was not earning or in that workforce, I was somehow less worthy. And it's notions like these that we are surrounded with. And sometimes we even do that to ourselves unconsciously that make us weak, that absolutely rip away our right to live our truth, to say what is that we need, to say what works for us. So please, for anybody who's listening to this, for anybody who's being able to nod their heads with what we're talking about today, to anyone who's going through a rough patch, please love yourself. Tell yourself that there's nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you. Nobody goes and chooses to be on a difficult journey in life. You just have to play the cards that are dealt out to you, right? So own them. Wear your struggles like a crown. Talk about it. Empower others. Empower yourself. Share your story. Bring the community together. That is what's going to liberate us all, I feel.
Thank you. That was very powerful, Nazan. Thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us and for writing that email and sharing your story. And I think you're absolutely right. When you sent that email, you said, I want this to resonate with women like me. And I think that it will.
I hope so.
And I think that every woman is a woman like you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so I think it's going to resonate with all of our listeners, regardless of whether they're on a fertility journey or not, and wherever they are in that journey as well.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. And once again, more power, more love, more hats off to you guys for doing this despite your very crazy schedules, which I have witnessed myself as being on the other side of the table. Like I said, 10 years down the road, you guys are going to be known to be pioneers for doing this for so many people out there who need the support. I am so glad, and I always take the opportunity to share your podcast page, your Instagram page with people who are on similar journeys, not even if necessarily they're on a fertility journey, just to see how the community comes together and how there are so many people out there who are like you, who are nodding to what you're saying, who understand you. Even if that kind of support's not coming from familiar faces, sometimes you reach out, you know? Don't be scared to reach out, to talk to people, to talk to strangers, hear their stories, share yours. This is how we empower each other. So thank you. Thank you so much for doing what you guys are doing. You're amazing. You're pink and you're amazing.
Thank you so much. And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at markandfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music from Mix Kit Raising Me Higher by Ajay Stelino. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.